In this demo, we will learn how to add support for downloading a file via our API. Let's add a new controller, Files Controller. We choose the empty API controller template and we give it a name. We set the template of the route attribute to API/files and we add one action to it. GetFile, accepting a file ID. We annotate it with the HTTP GET attribute, passing through file ID in the template. As it's a parameter, we surround it with curly brackets. There's a few built-in classes that will help you with working with files. You can work with file content result, which accepts the file bytes and a content type for the file. It derives from the abstract file result base class, as you can see when picking the definition. You can also work with file stream result. This accepts a stream to read from and the content type. And then you've got physical file result and virtual file result. These two allow you to pass through a file name and a content type. All of these also derive from the same file result class. But while you can use those, it's more convenient to call into return file. This method is defined on the controller base and it acts as a wrapper around the aforementioned file result subclasses. So this is what we're going to do. Now, obviously, you will need a file to download. Any file will do. I happen to have a PDF laying around here with some slides from another course, and I copied it to the project directory. On the properties of that file, I'm going to state that it should be copied to the output directory. Like that, we can load it from the root directory because it will be in the same place as where our application is running from. First, let's look up the actual file by file ID. For demo purposes, we'll hardcode the path. In a real-life scenario, you would probably use the file ID to fetch the correct file path. Then we check whether the file exists. If it doesn't, we return a not found. If it does, we read out the bytes and we pass those through to the file method. We also need to pass through a content type and the path to get the file name. We don't know about the content type yet, so we just set it to text/plain for now. Let's give that a try. Our file endpoint showed up in the documentation. Let's quick try it out and we just give a random ID, say 1 as value for the file ID, and we click execute. We got back a 200 OK, so far so good. When we click download file, it seems to have worked. Now let's try and open it. And something is off here. PDF doesn't seem to correctly load. That has to do with that content type. We know this is a PDF, yet we set the content type to text/plain. But that is not the correct type for a PDF. Let's fix that. We're looking at our controller again. We could manually input the correct media type for PDFs, which is application/PDF. But that would only solve our issue for one type of file. There's a better way. We can use a built-in service named the File Extension Content Type Provider. That's defined in Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.static files, so let's import that namespace. By calling into add singleton, passing through the type, on our services collection, we register the service with a singleton lifetime on our container. From that moment on, it is injectable in other parts of our code. We haven't covered this yet, but we will cover it in detail later on in the course. For now, just know that this statement allows us to inject a file extension content type provider in other parts of our code. And the part of our code where we want to inject it in is in our controller, because it's in a controller action that we are effectively going to use this. So we add a constructor and we set a file extension content type provider defined in Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.static files as a parameter for the constructor. Like that, the IOC container will inject it. We store it in a private read-only field. Now we can use it. We call into file extension content type provider.try_get_content_type to find the correct content type for our file. For that, we pass through the path to the file and, as an output parameter, content type. If it cannot be determined, we set it to application/octet-stream, which is a default media type for arbitrary binary data. You can look at it as a catch-all for those file types you don't have more specific information about. When we call into return file, we no longer pass through text plain as content type, but we pass through the resulting content type from our file extension content type provider. Let's give that another try. Let's input a file ID again and click execute. That seems to have worked. Let's click download here. And this time the PDF correctly opens. With that, we know all the basics there are to know in regards to getting resources. That leads us nicely into the next module, where we'll learn how to manipulate these. But first, let's check out the module summary.